Franz Kafka. He has a wonderful short story called Metamorphosis, which begins with a rather startling sentence that Gregor Samsa, the hero, wakes up and finds himself turned into a giant insect. Sort of standard interpretation, think cockroach, since it's about the most noxious insect we can think of. Samsa is born and finds himself a cockroach. In fact, before that, he was a very bourgeois, I think we could say, little man. He had his job, he had his family, he dutifully went to the job every day, he dutifully supported his family. And suddenly he wakes up and he's completely different. It's a horror story. I've never seen it adequately filmed. I don't know how you would film such a story. But reading it, what makes it so horrible is the fact that Gregor Samsa does not wake up thinking like an insect, whatever that would be. He wakes up thinking like a clerk and a family member, and is somehow trying to cope with the impossibility of his new body. There's a sense in which existentialism takes us through such metamorphoses all the time, at least in the thought experiments that it presents to us. And the idea is that we find ourselves sometimes in very strange, even absurd situations, and in those absurd, strange situations, we have to figure out who we are and what we're supposed to do. There are three themes I'd like to talk about. The first is the emphasis on the individual. All of these characters were, I think we can say without insult, truly eccentric. Kierkegaard defined himself against the reigning passions and doctrines of the age. In particular, when Kierkegaard was philosophizing, much of Danish society, and certainly the whole idea of Christianity, was wrapped in the idea of a kind of collective consciousness, sometimes summarized as the Holy Spirit, or in the secular realm, summarized by the term bourgeois. Kierkegaard, by contrast, defined himself as the individual. In fact, he said on his tombstone what he would like written is simply the individual. Nietzsche, of course, is another great eccentric. Nietzsche wrote pretty much in isolation. In fact, he lived in isolation for most of his mature life. He sometimes would reach out to an audience, but it's always very interesting that it's a very select audience. And in fact, he dedicates his books to the very few. In fact, one of the tricks that Nietzsche uses quite effectively, and I would say this is true of Kierkegaard as well, is he writes as if he's writing for you, the singular reader, alone. He really has a kind of mini-conspiratorial tone that makes us think it's just us, we're different, and we're especially different from all of them. The second theme is the importance of the passions. You might note that Kierkegaard is going to define what it means to really exist, that special notion of existence which is going to give rise to the term existentialism. But to really exist is to be passionate. In particular, it's to passionately commit oneself to a way of life, and in Kierkegaard's case, to passionately commit oneself to Christianity. He talks about passionate inwardness. So we're not talking about passions here fully expressed and exploded on the stage, so much as we're talking about passions that one might oneself feel but not show. And Kierkegaard makes a good deal out of talking about the truly passionate person isn't the one who is dramatically visible for everyone else. The truly passionate person is the one who is quite inwardly contained and defined by his or her passions. Nietzsche is well known as a very passionate philosopher. When you read his works, as I hope you do, it is filled with all sorts of excitement and enthusiasm, to put it in a rather trivial way. He uses more exclamation points than probably any other philosopher in the history of the subject. He is always expounding and enthusing. He's always praising, condemning. But in his life itself, it's very clear that while he was a very quiet and courteous man, his philosophy and his life were defined by some really exciting, dramatic, grand passions. And he encourages us to live according to our passions. The third theme, possibly the most famous, and certainly for some of the philosophers, Kierkegaard and Sartre in particular, the most central, is the concept of freedom. So instead of talking about freedom and reason as necessarily conjoined, and passions as equivalent to a kind of slavery, what the existentialists suggest is that we think of our lives in terms of passion. This doesn't mean stupid passion, although that certainly has its place. But Kierkegaard, for example, when he talks about passionate commitment, is onto something I think very important. And basically it's that passions give life meaning, and it's through passionate commitment that we give our lives the particular meaning that it has.
Creature diving into lapping ripples head first, a bug with no outrage. I've got soulless in the windowsill, the stage is emptied, all the pageantry is gone. But what if the
I am a ridiculous man. They call me mad now. That would be a promotion. Right, we're not still the same ridiculous man for them as before. I don't resent them anymore. Now, I love them all. Even when they laugh at me. I would laugh at them myself. Not at myself, but for love of them, if it did not make me so sad to look at them. Sad because they do not know the truth. And I do. How hard it is for one man who knows the truth. But they don't understand this. They won't understand it. It's perhaps from the time I was 7 years old. I knew I was ridiculous. In school, it was plain to me. Later, in college, it seemed as if every subject was founded on the premise that I was somehow a fool, that my ideas were false. I was floating in a vacuum. And since I grew into manhood, I relaxed into this understanding. I began to accept how foolish and without purpose I truly was. In fact, it became clear to me more and more that each thing on the earth is equal to another thing, and that each thing is tiny and insignificant, because each thing is made of the same cells and atoms in the same way, so nothing on the earth or under the stars, in the heavens, under the ground, it makes the slightest difference to anything else. It was dark, but one could distinctly make out tattered clouds, and between them, endless black patches. I saw in one of these patches a star. I began watching it intently. It was because that star had given me the idea to end my life. Why that star did that to me, I don't know. And then my elbow felt a tug. I turned to see a waif, a little girl, little more than 7 or 8. She had wet, broken shoes. They caught my eye particularly, and she's sputtering up some nonsense, shivering and barking like a dog. I understood that her mother was dying, that she'd gone out to find someone to get something to help, and I tried to shake her away from me and said, "Get away, go find a policeman." I shook her about as best I could, trying to lift my elbow away from her, but she would not leave me. Couldn't she see how I was exactly the wrong person, I thought, to help anyone? Didn't the star shine on her and tell her that I was about to do myself in? She ran away from me, to a stranger across the street. So I was free to return home, many other nights. My room is small and poor, with a garret window in the shape of a semicircle, and I went there at once, trying to maintain the purity of my purpose. I sat. Ideas wander through my mind, let them come and go as they will. The whole candle was burnt. I sat down quietly at my table. Out the revolver and put it down before me, and I asked myself, shall I shoot myself in the head? And answered too quickly, I shall shoot myself in the head. I knew that I should kill myself that night, for certain. It was the little girl, you see? Kept me from ending my life. I shall turn into nothing. Absolutely nothing. I shall completely cease to exist immediately, and so everything shall completely cease to exist. I stamped and shouted at the unhappy child as though to say not only I feel no pity, but moreover I have no use for you, or for pity, for in 2 hours everything under the heavens shall be extinguished. It seemed clear to me that life and the world somehow depended on me being present. And I may almost say that the world now seemed created for me alone. If I shot myself, the world would cease to exist. and yet, feeling such compassion against my will for the despair of a child, I fell asleep in my chair at the table. To think which had never happened to me before, I dropped asleep. I suddenly dreamt that I picked up the revolver and aimed it straight at my heart. My heart, not my head. I had determined beforehand to fire at my head, my right temple. I did not feel any pain. All I know is that I was suddenly picked up by a person, or rather a being. I do not know how long we were flying. I cannot imagine it. It happened, as it always does in dreams, where you skip past space and time and the laws of thought and existence and only pause upon the points for which the heart yearns. I remember I suddenly saw in the distance a star. Is that serious? I asked. I thought meant to ask questions. No. That is the star you saw between the clouds when you were coming home. The being who was carrying me replied. I took to the streets and threw myself on the doors of the philosophers and the politicians. I blamed myself for infecting them with the disease that you and I carry. I begged the artists to write new songs, trying to think of some way, anything, to let them know how much I loved them, how much they needed to punish me for what I had done. My mind pulled images from my own life. I asked the priest to nail two boards together and crucify me. I could not kill myself. I had not the strength. But I wanted to suffer at their hands. I yearned for suffering. I longed that my blood should be drained to the last drop in these agonies. And they only laughed at me. And then I awoke, alone. I thought of the waif, of the innocence of those people, of the retired captain next door kicking against the wall with a footful of vodka, of how they had refused to crucify me. stared at the revolver. I thought of what had been revealed to me. And I was overjoyed. I had seen something beautiful, there was no doubt. Perhaps in the end it was my desire to die that did in fact give birth to me. Since then, I have been speaking, much as I am now, to anyone who will listen to me, in this case, the 20 of you. I have seen the truth. I will not and cannot believe that evil is the normal condition of mankind. Nothing is inevitable. Each part of us wants to be beautiful and in love and unprejudiced. If it were so that human life is nothing but a speck of grit, a little piece of carbon settling around a little piece of hydrogen in a universe of dark matter, then why should some part of me think only of a child before blowing my own brains onto my favorite chair? Why should that matter against all reason? Because compassion is the basic component of the human race. Do you know, when I first started telling the story of my dream, I would conceal the fact that I had been the purpose of their corruption. I thought it would damage my credibility, for one. And for another, I was ashamed. I'm not ashamed anymore. But I do make my penance by telling the truth now. Now suppose this paradise never comes to pass, that I understand, yet I shall go on preaching it. And yet how simple it is. In one day, in 1 hour, everything could be arranged at once. The chief thing is to love others like yourself. That is the chief thing. To look at somebody who you think is worth nothing, worth no more or less than anyone else, and to give them the same benefits of kindness and respect that you would expect of them. To treat them as if they are good because you are good. Together, that is how we all are. That is the chief thing. That is the truth. If only everyone wants it, it can be arranged at once. I want it. And I hope that you want it too. For my part, I want to begin the arrangements. And that's why I tracked down that little girl.
Something about her beyond this earth, swirling around us and beyond this earth. And I would keep it till my chest would burst, and I would be dancing on the burning flame. I'll go away. I know my place. I'll stay away. I know my place. My just give me, oh, just give me just one more summer. Mother took a toll now, and life's been spent, and we bend in the world now to the solitary end. I could have handled, could have found a way, and I would never lead her into the haze, but I know my place. Stay away. I know my place. Go away. I know my place. But just give me just one more summer.
你给了我一个新的希望，我过去的一切都已经死了，是你让我的生命重新诞生，你一定要答应我。
我怎么能答应你？我连我自己真正要什么我都不知道，你不是下午才这样说过我的吗？我怎么能答应你呢？
因为全世界的人都冤枉了你，只有我是唯一能了解你的人。
我连我自己都不了解，怎么可能？
可是，你是我活下来唯一真正的希望啊！只有你才能让我觉得比死更幸福。
怎么好像我在见死不救？你的幸福怎么可以叫我来替你负责，替你决定？
因为你知道，你关心我。
在说什么？
不然你为什么回来这里？
我回来找我的电话。
是吗？那也不一定要今天来啊。你关心我，对不对？
不能这样子乱猜。
琪琪，你不要走。
其他的人一样都这样子乱猜。
我没有乱猜。你知道我没有乱
猜。停车，停车！啊！
大蓝帽子，你超在你的，奇怪了，这前面才会撞着人，车后头也会撞着人的。
他就在你的后面啊。
在后面也是一样嘛，撞上就是撞上了嘛，怎么车并不会撞上他呢？
这是因为你紧急刹。
兴？
当然不高兴了，那是骂人的啊！
你不怕死吗？
那活得好好的，想那么多干啥呢？
这就对了嘛！哪个人不贪生怕死，不热爱生命呢？为什么我们不把好色解释成对一切真善美的欣赏跟感激呢？其实就是因为我们都跟他一样，对真善美根本没有办法辨识，那我们怪他干嘛？这么说起来，看到的这一切，一定还有更多新的面貌等着我们去发现。当我们每天不断的对真理有新的发现的时候，活着才有意思啊！你也想找个机会，让每一棵花草树木，每一个活生生的人，到处都暗示了我们可以更幸福的活下去的新希望。去战胜虚伪，其实不是要真的去死，而是要真正诚实的活下去。我实在太笨了。如果说到处都是真理，那些自以为是至圣先师的人，还有什么理由可以继续装模作样？如果我们不去规定说真的只有一个，怎么会跑出来这么多假的？就是因为这么真假难分，所以才会有这么多人对人的猜忌，人跟人的误会，对彼此有这么多不合理的期望。说不定他才是真正的孔子在世啊！
神经病啊！
可是我们不但没有给他任何机会让他表现他的才华，反而假借孔老夫子那套标准答案。规定成这副封闭的样子，他变得这么盲从，这么空虚，空虚到拿我以前写的那些书，就拿被舔的死了。难怪他会参与天真善良的心中人中，就是再有领悟真理的才华，也一定会退化的。还来得及，这几本书我一定要重新写。